Where does our anxiety come from? Why do we keep finding ourselves overwhelmed by those thoughts and the terrible feelings that seem to flood our entire bodies? Today, I want to explore the roots of anxiety. What happened in our experience that keeps anxiety at the forefront of our present experience? Why can't we just get over it? Just when we think life is going in our favor, we get suddenly slammed by that anxiety monster. I'm reading an amazing book called Mindsight by Dr. Daniel J. Siegel. The insights that I have been getting from this book are transformative, to say the least. Today, I want to talk about some of those insights that have been helping me understand my own experience with anxiety and how my anxiety was formed in the earliest years when I was a child and has been a part of my life ever since. Since recovering from alcohol addiction, I have been diligently working to uncover all the shadow aspects of myself, and instead of resisting them, instead to welcome them. And by facing these things directly, the power of them over my life is greatly diminished. And this is where a lot of us get stuck. We don't want to look. We don't want to face the darkest parts of ourselves. And I don't mean dark as in bad. I mean dark as in hidden, because we don't want to see them. So please join me in this exploration so that we can see our repetitive patterns and start to untangle them so that we can start to learn to heal ourselves. Dr. Siegel begins our journey in early childhood, the formative years, when we first started to learn that we were a person, that we were this individual, this point in our lives where the groundwork of our emotional lives began. The groundwork that determined our level of emotional well-being is laid out at this point. All of our parents responded to us in a particular way, according to their capacities at the time. And this is what created in us an attachment style. And this is what is going to carry us throughout our lives into adulthood. This attachment style is the main thing that determines how we manage stress throughout our lives. So now I want to explore some of these attachment styles. If we got lucky, we had parents who consistently tuned in. They were sensitive and they were responsive to our very basic needs. We were nurtured in a way that developed a secure attachment. We were comforted when we needed comforting. In the earliest stages of our psyche, this formed the foundational belief that we can rely on others. We can trust. This foundation of love and trust leaves no room for insecurity. This interaction with our parents instilled a very strong ability to regulate our emotional states and experience a sense of general safety within ourselves. When we grow up securely attached, research shows that these children and adults are more likely to reach their potential. And according to Dr. Siegel, these are directly reflected in how the middle prefrontal cortex was developed and how the neurons are actually firing in there. These are the parts of our brain that determine how we regulate our emotions, how empathetic we are, how much self-awareness that we have. And I don't know about you, but I did not have such fortune. My parents were young and had their attachment issues to deal with. I have learned over the years, though, to forgive them for what they just did not have control over. They were both preoccupied with their own past and their unresolved shadows. Insecure attachment is probably what many of us who struggle with anxiety deal with. Just my opinion, though. But even if our parents loved us, we did not get consistent nurturing for whatever reason. This resulted in what Dr. Siegel calls ambivalent attachment. Sometimes our parents were attentive to us, to our needs, and sometimes they weren't. And in our earliest years, we didn't know if our parents were going to respond in a way that made us feel secure. We started to develop anxiety, even way back then. Can you imagine that? Because we could not predict our parents would meet our fundamental needs. And this is where our attachment system was learning to be overactivated. I remember feeling a heightened sense of anxiety and insecurity in my very earliest childhood memories. The environment that I was in was characterized by substance use, including a father who was a heroin addict, and domestic violence. But sadly, some of us had parents that were not available to us at all on an emotional level. They were unresponsive to our needs as babies. Those are parents who probably are dealing with some unresolved trauma shadows and possibly even mental illness. It's very sad. This creates in a child an avoidant attachment. This person develops in a way that suppresses their needs. Their parent has rejected them, and so they suppress that essential child-parent need for connection. They don't have to feel rejected if they suppress it. And sadly, it has become normalized for them to feel disconnected from their parents. So, as they grow into early childhood, on the outside, they might appear kind of indifferent towards their parents, but on the inside, the child is highly stressed. And this might appear as sort of an emotional rigidity. And as this child grows into adulthood, the avoidantly attached person struggles with intimacy in all their friendships and in their relationships. And it's not uncommon for this person to be described by others as maybe aloof or unapproachable. And then there's the disorganized attachment. If our parent or our caregiver was a source of fear to us, we could grow up with a lot of confusion and no strategy to find comfort and live basically a life of emotional turmoil and probably destructive behaviors that only perpetuate our suffering. And this is where a person has an increased risk of developing mental health problems, and this person is more likely to suffer from dissociation or depersonalization, and it's quite sad, actually. Most of us didn't grow up to be securely attached adults. If you did, you probably wouldn't be watching this video. We can see the evidence of that. Those attachment patterns that were installed in us from the beginning of our lives don't just fade with time. They are obvious and they are persistent even now and will continue to be so until we address them and bring them into the open. Until we do that, our relationships and our inability to manage stress and anxiety in an effective way are going to continue to be issues for us. We might even find that we're maybe a combination of the attachments. However, understanding our patterns is going to help us see why we react the way we do. This recognition and this understanding is also how we can cross that threshold to change and to healing. These attachments are not fixed. They are not unchangeable. Dr. Siegel emphasizes that many of our current struggles in life are because we haven't made sense of our past. It's just a bunch of confusion and chaos. This is obviously reflective of our emotional life here and now. Until we confront that past and make some sense of it, we can't change. So this is where we learn to develop a coherent life narrative. This is how adults find a way to understand and articulate their stories. Even the most challenging childhood experiences can be resolved. It's not that we fool ourselves into believing, oh, they weren't that bad, they weren't that terrible. They probably were pretty awful. It's just making sense of them. It's the confusion about them that creates the most harm to us. This is how adults who grew up with insecure attachments can raise securely attached children. It happens, but most of the time, insecurely attached parents pass that insecurity on to their kids. So really, who is to blame here? And I'm not saying we excuse the behaviors of our insecure parent figures, but we realize why they behaved the way that they did. My mother was 21 and living with unresolved trauma, trying to raise kids. My father as well, and used heroin to escape his mental pain. Then a stepfather who inflicted horrible acts reflective of his own childhood trauma. This does not excuse anyone's behaviors. It just is as it is due to a cycle of insecurely attached humans that never healed. So here we are, ready to understand and articulate our life stories, to make some sense of it, to make it more coherent. Through this process, we can integrate rather than deny our life story. This, my friends, is how the cycle can be broken. Dr. Siegel states that the best predictor of a child's security of attachment is not what happened to his parents as children, but rather how his parents made sense of those childhood experiences. He even wrote a book about it called The Whole Brain Child, which I'm probably going to check out next. This is how we heal and become more resilient as adults. So we do have the capacity to change if we are willing. So far, we've discussed secure and insecure attachment patterns, and with the most emphasis, of course, on the insecure patterns, because that's why we're talking today. But there is another one called earned secure attachment. Can you think of somebody in your life, during the course of your life, maybe in your teenage years, who was not a parent, who positively impacted you? This may be someone you may have developed a meaningful connection with. It could have been anyone from a relative, a mentor, a coach. Sometimes these connections can help us create a more secure attachment. Dr. Siegel calls this the earned secure attachment because it's in this relationship an insecure person was given the space and the support they needed to make sense of their lives. And this relationship helped them become more whole and to develop a more coherent story. This shows that insecurely attached adults can change their lives and become more securely attached. Insecurity is not our fate. We can change even if we didn't have a meaningful connection with somebody. We can do the work by developing what Dr. Siegel calls Mindsight. We can actually change how things are firing in our middle prefrontal cortex. If we are securely attached in our early relationships, those integrative fibers of that part of the brain just have more growth. This is why securely attached people can manage and regulate emotions better. They can think more clearly, they have more resilience, and they can be more flexible in various life situations. This is what it's like when the parts of our brain function in a harmonious manner. It's evident that our outside world does affect the physical development of our brain. This is the integrated mind. However, people who are insecurely attached lack this integration. That is why some of us get stuck in these emotional states and all the associated behaviors that they induce in us. We can feel this overwhelm by the constant chaos of our emotions, and we just can't cope. Anxiety is what happens when you are between that feeling of being like emotionally stuck or trapped and also overwhelmed by the feelings. We have this very narrow tolerance range, and it's through integration that we can widen this range of tolerance so that we have space to better manage our responses to life, to regulate our emotions more effectively. So this is why making sense of our life story is key to the process of integration. One thing that has really helped me is writing. Some people write a letter to their younger self or their current self. We are trying to make sense of why we are the way we are. For me, that included making sense of why my parents were the way they were. This practice helps free us from the past. Even if it's still in our memory, the emotional ties to our present self can start to dissolve, the ties that held insecurity in place for all these years. It's through self-observation that we can pay attention to our thoughts. We can pay attention to the feelings and notice the bodily sensations and reactions that come from the thoughts. We start to see what patterns in our thoughts that are creating the over-arousal of our nervous system. And then there's understanding. This goes back to understanding our parents and acknowledging the fact that they never made sense of their own lives. They were insecure, and likewise, thus, they raised us to be insecure as well. It just happened that way. We can realize that everyone in our lives has their own stuff to deal with, their own thoughts, their own feelings. Most people are preoccupied with this and don't see others except on a surface level. We only see the harm that they did to us and never the damage that was done to them. As we become more aware of our emotions, we get in the habit of noticing them, we're going to gradually become better at regulating them as we develop more inner space within ourselves. This is the Mindsight that Dr. Siegel is talking about. This Mindsight is going to help us make sense of our lives and accept that things happened the way they did. We can't change it. By understanding our insecure attachments that were formed in early childhood and why they happened that way, we can begin to make sense of our lives instead of living in this constant state of emotional confusion. So what else can help us go through this process to break this cycle? Understanding our early attachment patterns, and having compassion for our little selves. This happened without our permission. It happened outside of our awareness. We cannot judge ourselves for that. Reflect on your earliest experiences. What patterns do you see with your parent figures? Be honest with how you feel about those experiences. Allow yourself to feel. How do these early experiences and connections with your parents affect your life now, your thought patterns, your feeling states, and your behaviors? Seek to understand your parents or caregivers. What perspectives were they subject to in their minds that had an impact on you? What unresolved insecurity were they dealing with? This can even help us to become more compassionate to those who may have hurt us. Find people who can support you. It can be a therapist, a mentor, a friend, someone you know that you can trust. These relationships can give us the space and the support that we need to develop that earned, secure attachment that I mentioned earlier. As we start to make sense of our life story, we integrate our past and simultaneously allow it to transform us. The safety of this kind of supportive connection can help us immensely. And finally, we have to believe that change is possible. Making sense of our history makes all the difference. It's not an easy process, but it's worthwhile if you want to break free from these shackles of the past that are causing you so much anxiety in your present life. So before I wrap up, please check out the book Mindsight by Dr. Daniel J. Siegel. I will leave a link for it in the description. I hope this video provided some insight and hope for somebody that's out there. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.